The conversation that saves or ends your relationship with an avoidant partner is rarely loud, dramatic, or explosive. In fact, it's usually quiet, subtle, almost disappointing in how calm it feels. And that's exactly why it matters so much. Most relationships with avoidant partners don't collapse because of cheating, betrayal, or a single argument. They collapse because of one misunderstood conversation, one moment where fear speaks louder than truth, and pressure replaces presence. This conversation doesn't happen when emotions are high. It happens when one person finally stops chasing clarity and starts speaking from grounded self-respect. And whether the relationship survives depends entirely on how this conversation is handled, not what is said. Avoidant partners are not afraid of love the way people think. They're afraid of being needed in a way they can't escape. They associate closeness with obligation, emotional debt, and loss of autonomy. So when the conversation begins with accusations, demands, timelines, or emotional ultimatums, where is this going? Why can't you open up? I need more from you right now. Their nervous system doesn't hear intimacy. It hears danger. It hears control. And in that moment, their instinct isn't to explain or connect. It's to pull away, shut down, or emotionally disappear. That's how relationships with avoidance quietly end. Not with a breakup, but with distance that never closes again. The conversation that ends the relationship usually sounds reasonable on the surface. It sounds like honesty. It sounds like vulnerability. But underneath, it carries pressure. It carries the energy of, I need you to change so I can feel safe. And avoidants are extremely sensitive to that energy. They may nod, agree, promise effort, but internally something breaks. They feel trapped. And once an avoidant feels trapped, they don't fight. They detach. They become polite, distant, distracted, and eventually unreachable. That's when people say they changed overnight, when in reality they shut down during that conversation. But there is another version of this conversation, the one that saves the relationship, or at least saves you. And paradoxically, it's the conversation where you stop trying to save anything. This is where most people get it wrong. They think saving the relationship means convincing the avoidant to stay, to open up, to commit, to reassure. But with avoidance, the moment you stop chasing closeness is the moment closeness becomes possible. The saving conversation doesn't come from fear of loss. It comes from emotional independence. This conversation begins with clarity instead of confusion. Instead of asking questions that beg for reassurance, you make statements that reflect self-awareness. You don't say, why are you like this? You say, I've noticed the dynamic between us, and I want to be honest about how I experience it. That single shift changes everything, because now you're not interrogating, you're observing. Avoidance respect observation. They resist emotional interrogation, but they listen when they don't feel accused. The tone matters more than the words. Calm, slow, grounded. No emotional spikes. No dramatic pauses waiting for them to respond. You're not trying to pull something out of them. You're placing something on the table and letting them choose whether to meet it. And this is where the power subtly shifts. Because for the first time, you're not positioning them as the emotional authority. You're standing as an equal, self-contained, aware, and unafraid of the outcome. In the conversation that saves the relationship, you acknowledge their nature without trying to fix it. You might say something like, I understand that closeness can feel overwhelming for you, and I don't want to pressure you into being someone you're not. This sentence alone disarms most avoidance. It tells their nervous system, you are not being hunted. And once that fear softens, something unexpected happens. They become more present. Not because you demanded it, but because you removed the threat. Then comes the most important part, the boundary. This is where most people fail. They either avoid boundaries completely or present them as ultimatums. But a true boundary isn't a threat. It's a statement of self-respect. You calmly explain what you need to remain emotionally healthy without insisting they meet it. For example, at the same time, I know I can't continue in a connection where emotional distance is the default. I value consistency, communication, and emotional availability. I'm not asking you to promise anything. I'm just being honest about what works for me. Notice what's missing here. There's no demand, no timeline, No or else, just truth. And that's terrifying and attractive to an avoidant at the same time. Terrifying because they can't control you with distance anymore. Attractive because you're no longer emotionally dependent on their responses. This is the moment where the relationship is either saved or revealed. If the avoidant leans in, even slightly, asks questions, reflects, or expresses fear instead of avoidance, that's a sign the connection has a chance. Not because they suddenly changed, but because they felt safe enough to stay present. Growth with avoidance is slow and subtle. It doesn't look like grand declarations. It looks like less withdrawal over time. But if they emotionally check out, deflect, minimize, or give vague responses like, I don't know, this is just how I am, or you're overthinking, that's also an answer. And this is where the conversation saves you, because instead of chasing clarity for months or years, you receive it in one honest moment. You see whether they are capable of meeting you where you are, or only willing to accept you when you shrink. Here's the hard truth most people don't want to hear. You cannot build intimacy with someone who only feels safe when they are emotionally distant. No amount of patience, understanding, or love will change that unless they choose to face their fear. And the saving conversation is not about forcing that choice. It's about refusing to abandon yourself while waiting. Many people walk away from this conversation thinking they failed. They think, if I had said it better, softer, differently, maybe they would have stayed. But that's not true. The outcome of this conversation is not determined by your performance. It's determined by their capacity. And once you understand that, you stop taking emotional distance personally. Ironically, avoidants often come back after this conversation. After they realize you're no longer chasing, no longer negotiating your needs, no longer revolving around their availability. Distance stops working as a control mechanism. And for the first time, they feel the absence they thought they wanted. But whether they return or not becomes secondary, because the real victory of this conversation is that you reclaim your emotional center. This conversation doesn't guarantee a happy ending. It guarantees clarity. And clarity is what ends emotional suffering. You either move forward together with mutual awareness, or you move forward alone with dignity. Both outcomes are wins, even if one hurts more at first. So if you're standing at the edge of this conversation, understand this. Speak calmly, not desperately. Speak honestly, not strategically. Speak from self-respect, not fear of loss. Don't try to convince them to choose you. Choose yourself, and let their response reveal everything you need to know. Because the conversation that saves or ends your relationship is not about keeping someone. It's about no longer losing yourself.